Thanks very much for joining us today for this webinar about the Community Investment Program grants application process. I'm Erica Howes. I'm a communications specialist here at CIRA, and I'm here with Maureen James, who manages the Community Investment Program. This webinar is for people interested in preparing a grant application for our 2020 funding call, which is open until 2 p.m. Eastern Time, February 25th. A recording of this webinar will be available afterwards in a few days through the CIRA website in the same section where you registered to attend today. Also, most of this information is available within our How to Apply section online. A few logistical details to start. Given the large number of people participating in the webinar today, we can't hear you because your line is muted. So please type your questions in the right-hand panel and we'll make sure to answer them at the end of the presentation. If you can't see the control panel to ask questions, please click on the orange arrow to expand it there. In the session today, we'll cover a few topics. Firstly, an overview of CIRA and the Community Investment Program, the application timeline, eligibility and funding focus areas, evaluation criteria, how to use the online application system, and application tips. And we'll leave time at the end for Q&A as well. So first, for a bit about CIRA. We strengthen Canada's internet in a number of ways. Our goal is to give back to the community in a measurable way by supporting and investing in initiatives that make Canada's internet stronger, safer, and more accessible for Canadians. Our organization, CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, we're best known for managing the .ca domain on behalf of all Canadians. And we currently have more than 2.8 million .ca domains under management. Anyone with a .ca domain can become a member of our organization for free, and we currently have over 15,000 members. While our #1 priority is the safe and secure management of Canada's top-level domain, as a member-based not-for-profit organization ourselves, we also have a much broader goal to strengthen Canada's internet. And we do this in a number of ways. For example, we developed an internet performance test, which is a quick and easy way to test your internet connection at home, which is intended to provide data for researchers and service providers to better understand and improve the Canadian internet. We've been supporting the development of local internet exchange points in cities across Canada so that internet service providers, content providers, and major customers can connect their networks to each other locally for better performance and lower costs, and to strengthen the resilience of our domestic infrastructure. We engage with stakeholders from around the world to develop policy standards and operational solutions related to the cross-border nature of the internet. And of course, there's CIRA's Community Investment Program grants, which launched in 2014 and which funds community projects along similar lines. All of CIRA's Community Investment Program funding resources are made possible through revenues earned from .ca website registrations and renewals. So now let's take a look at the application timeline for grants. The application period opened January 15th, and it closes on February 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We emphasize the time zone in the deadline because we do have applicants across the country, and we cannot accept late applications. The online application system automatically closes at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on that deadline. And speaking of deadlines, in general, one thing we can't emphasize enough is to get your application in early. And here's why. When your application is submitted into the system, CIRA staff actually review it to ensure it's eligible and complete. All reviews take place as soon as applications are submitted, and we send you a follow-up email if anything is missed or incorrect. Typically, about 50% of the applications submitted require some kind of adjustment before they can be accepted. These are things including, for example, missing documentation, sections left blank in the application form, budget revenues and expenses not matching. Applications with incomplete information are rejected. So we strongly recommend that you submit your application well before the deadline so that we can review it and you have that time to make any of those edits, adjustments required before the deadline. Only complete eligible applications will be forwarded to the Community Investment Committee for review. And further on this about eligibility review, when you do submit your application, please keep an eye on your inbox in the following days for messages from Fluid Review, which is the online application system. So if there are any questions or further information required for your application arising from the eligibility review, you'll be notified via messages from Fluid Review. And sometimes these get caught in spam filters, we've realized in the past, so be sure to check those carefully. The system sends confirmation emails on receipt of your application before the eligibility review takes place, as well as if your application is accepted to move on to the next stage, which is committee review. If your application passes the eligibility review, the committee reviews projects over a period of about 1 month in March and April. So each application is reviewed independently by multiple committee members. The committee meets in April to discuss the applications and make selections. And then their recommendation is provided to our board of directors for approval in early May. We then notify all applicants of the outcome of their application by email. If your project is chosen, you'll receive a letter from us in May outlining the requirements for receiving the grant. The agreement may take up to 1 month to complete and sign. We will then make a public funding announcement in June, and successful grant recipients can then begin their projects. So for planning purposes in your application, you would consider June your start month for any CIRA funding.
And now for a change of voice, it's Maureen James here, and I'm going to be going through the specifics of the grants call, 2020 grants call with you. First of all, we have $1.25 million allocated for grants this year. Grants are available up to $100,000, and one grant is available up to $250,000. One point to note here, if you apply for the $250,000 grant, you will not be considered for the $100,000 grants. So you must choose at the outset which you are applying for. However, grant requests can certainly be lower than $100,000. Any grants over $100,000 will be considered as part of the $250,000 group. Another thing to note, especially to people here on the webinar, if you're an organization that already has an active grant with CIRA, you cannot apply to this round. Active grants need to be reported, reviewed, and signed off by us before you can apply again. Projects are intended to be approximately 1 year in duration. However, we favor projects for which the results can be sustained beyond that initial year. The one project that we may grant up to $250,000 will have up to 2 years to implement if needed. Eligible applications are reviewed by the Community Investment Evaluation Committee, which is comprised of 10 to 12 individuals. 4 are CIRA board members, and the other members are leaders in the internet space who are independent of the board and of each other. Over the past 6 years, we've supported 151 projects with a total of $6.7 million. So let's go over the funding areas in 2020 since they've changed since last year. CIRA's Community Investment Program funds innovative community projects that contribute to building a trusted internet for all Canadians. We've prioritized 4 funding areas for 2020: infrastructure, digital literacy, cybersecurity, and community leadership. For those of you who may be familiar with CIRA's Community Investment Program or have applied in the past, you'll notice that the online services category is no longer listed. Historically, this category included projects like building online apps, online content, and platforms to address social, economic, and environmental needs. In order to make room for more infrastructure, digital literacy, cybersecurity, and community leadership projects, it was decided we will not be funding online services this year. Specifically, in each funding area, we'll go over quickly what we're looking for in 2020. In infrastructure, our aim is to increase the number of Canadians who have access to a high quality and high performing internet. So that can include funding connectivity research, core infrastructure, last mile connectivity services, and operational solutions that increase performance, lower costs, and improve data sovereignty. These tend to be expensive projects, so often CIRA will be one funder of many towards one of these types of projects. Some of the examples from recently include high-speed fiber optic installation connecting underserviced remote and rural communities in Winnipeg's metropolitan region, and a high-speed internet connectivity to 2 small francophone communities on the Port-au-Port Peninsula in Newfoundland. In the digital literacy area, CIRA aims to improve digital literacy knowledge and skills among Canadians. In this area, we fund research, educational frameworks, learning resources, tools, and training programs to improve Canadians' digital literacy knowledge and skills. Examples here include providing elementary and high school teachers across Canada with a handbook and training on how to incorporate artificial intelligence lessons in their classrooms, or after school and camps programs to improve girls' digital skills. One thing to note for the digital literacy area, we find it important to emphasize that it's specifically focused on developing digital skills. So it's not taking content and making it accessible online, and it wouldn't include apps that serve other purposes than building digital skills. So the primary focus of a digital literacy project must be imparting digital skills and capacity to function effectively online. In the cybersecurity area, CIRA is focusing on increasing Canadian cybersecurity knowledge and safety from threats. Here we fund research, educational frameworks, tools, and training programs that increase Canadians' online safety. Examples here include research to identify DNS attack scenarios and pattern recognition models to mitigate malicious activity and preserve integrity of DNS records. Or another project we funded is developing a cybersecurity research, education, and knowledge framework for Indigenous communities. Finally, in the community leadership area, CIRA aims to engage, support, and strengthen a vibrant and resilient internet community domestically. Here we fund events and policy research that broaden public awareness and understanding of domestic internet policy and governance. So some recent examples include support for advocacy and research around increased digital access for low-income communities and advocating for internet affordability, or consultations around digital policy to support community broadband with remote First Nations communities. You'll find examples of all of these types of projects under the various funding areas on our website, and there's a link right here on the slide. New also this year in 2020, our granting program does consider applications that benefit all Canadians, but this year we're especially looking for initiatives that benefit students, so students from kindergarten to grade 12 all the way to post-secondary, or projects that benefit northern, rural, and Indigenous communities. We also like to make sure you know that there are things that we don't fund, since we don't want applicants spending their time completing applications that would be ineligible. So we call it the top 10 list of things we do not fund, but there are really only 10 things on the list. First one is projects focused on online services, as we've mentioned, so online apps and platforms that address social, economic, and/or environmental needs. Requests that focus solely on travel and expenses to attend conferences. Projects focus on website design, development, and deployment. Proposals that provide generic IT training or equipment to support that training. End user equipment for individual use, so personal or mobile devices. Any equipment funded through projects must stay with the applicant organization or institution. We also don't fund general fundraising appeals or ongoing core operations, for example, permanent staff salaries, administrative functions, firewalls, intranets, things that you would constantly need on an ongoing basis. We don't fund costs that take place prior to a grant from CIRA. We don't fund marketing or research associated with marketing activities, and projects that are based outside of Canada, we would also not fund. So let's look a little bit at eligibility review. As we already mentioned, if there's only one thing you take away from this webinar, it should be this. The February 25th deadline includes completing any back and forth arising from the eligibility review. So you'll submit what you think is a complete application, and the system will send you an automatic acknowledgement email right away. However, that doesn't mean your project is eligible. It just means it's been received by the system. CIRA staff review the applications for completeness and eligibility and follow up within 2 days requesting any additional information, providing you the opportunity to resubmit with the complete information. In the past, approximately 50% of applications have needed some follow-up. The follow-up messages are sent from Fluid Review from the email address noreply@fluidreview.com. So please be on the lookout for these as they frequently get caught in spam filters. If the eligibility issues are adequately addressed by the deadline, then the application can move to the next stage. Okay, so let's now assume your project has made it past the eligibility review and is being evaluated by the committee. Projects will be evaluated by our Community Investment Evaluation Committee and given a score out of 100, as you can see on the table in this slide. Last year, we received over 150 applications and funded 21. We can't predict how many applications we'll receive this year, but given demand and available funding, in general, we can say that fewer than 20% of the applications we receive may be funded. So please do use these evaluation criteria as a guide when preparing your application. There are 2 requirements that CIRA has for funded projects, and they are that the project align both with CIRA's community investment program aimed to build a trusted internet for all Canadians, as well as the aims of the specific funding area being applied to. And when projects produce outputs, they must be open and available for anyone to use, share, and build upon. The Community Investment Committee is looking for projects that align with a number of different areas that are important in our scoring. So let's take a look at the specific scoring and evaluation criteria that they'll use to assess projects. Beneficiaries are assessed as 15% of the score. CIRA favors projects where the intended Canadian beneficiaries are clearly articulated, with preference to initiatives that benefit students and Northern, rural, and Indigenous communities. The project plan is assessed as 20% of the score. CIRA is looking for projects that demonstrate a cohesive plan of activities and outputs that can be reasonably completed in the proposed project timeframe, and also a project team that includes sufficient leadership, project management experience, and organizational capacity to deliver the proposed activities and outputs. Outcomes are assessed as 20% of the score. CIRA is looking for project outcomes that are specific, achievable, measurable, quantitatively and qualitatively, and that the intended project impact is realistic. Innovation is assessed as 15% of the score. In this area, CIRA is looking for projects that clearly demonstrate an innovative approach, responding to community needs in an original way. Sustainability is assessed as 10% of the score. CIRA is looking for projects that can be sustained beyond the end of the CIRA funding. And finally, the budget is assessed as 20% of the score. CIRA is looking for budgets that are reasonable, given the scope and activities of the proposed project, and that include all costs with sufficient detail to understand the requirements to deliver the project. The budget request should also be reasonable within the context of the organization's overall operating budget. CIRA prefers to see contributions from other sources and/or the applicant themselves. There are reasons that applications get declined, and based on our experience, some of the main ones are lack of clear alignment. The activities may not clearly align to the aims of CIRA's 4 funding areas. For example, projects that build online content and networking platforms are not eligible. And any resources, tools, or research developed must connect directly to one of the 4 funding areas. Also, the projects that will be prioritized will be ones that benefit students and Northern, rural, and Indigenous communities. Another reason projects tend to be declined is unclear project outcomes. The activities may be described in the application, but the intended outcomes and impact of the project are less clear. CIRA is interested in seeing a clear plan and knowing the specific changes you expect to result from your initiative. Concerns about the project budget are another reason. For example, if certain project costs lack detail or are perceived as too high or unnecessary, the project may be ranked lower. Also, the financial request must be proportionate to the size and capacity of your organization, and all in-kind contributions from your organization and others should be reflected. Lack of innovation is another reason. The project may not reflect adequate innovation or an original approach to meeting a community need. And finally, possibly the most common reason is the high demand. We receive hundreds of applications and there are only so many we can fund. In 2019, we received 153 applications and funded 21, so fewer than 15%. And while our funding areas have changed in 2020, there seems to be a lot of interest in the program, so we expect it will be quite competitive. Okay, getting ready to apply. When you apply, you must submit a completed application form and project budget. In addition, there are other materials required of each applicant that you should have ready. First, you must provide proof of eligibility. Examples of proof can include documentation confirming your charitable status and incorporation or your not-for-profit incorporation. Academic researchers should provide a letter confirming you are employed by the academic institution. Also, nonprofit organizations and charities must provide a list of your board of directors with the board members' contact information, including organizations that they're affiliated with, their titles, phone numbers, and/or emails. Also, a copy of your most recent audited financial statements is required. If you do not have audited financial statements, we will accept reviewed statements conducted by an accountant that have been signed by 2 members of your board. We also look for a current year, i.e. 2020, operating budget. Please ensure the organizational budget clearly indicates the year. An operating budget shows planned revenue and expenses for your organization's activities in the current year. The operating budget should cover the period until December 2020 at a minimum. For projects above $100,000, a 2-year forecasted budget is required. Universities are not required to provide their organizational budgets. However, they must provide a resume for the lead researcher. All of these documents are to be submitted through our online application system. These materials are checked internally at CIRA during the eligibility review for completeness before your application can be moved forward to the Community Investment Committee. As mentioned previously, about 50% of applications need corrections or additions, often in these documents, so we encourage you to submit well in advance of the February 25th deadline. There is no need to provide additional documentation beyond what is requested in the online application system. The committee will receive and review only the application form and the attachments we've requested, so no need to submit anything extra. You'll submit the application itself in our online system. You also can view a sample copy of the entire application form on our website. We provide explanations throughout the form to clarify what is being asked of you with each question. Some people use the sample application form from the website as a guide to draft their responses offline in another document before cutting and pasting into the online application system when they're ready. If you have a poor internet connection, that might be a good way to approach it. Now let's look at the online application. You can access the link to the online application form through the CIRA site in the How to Apply section. The direct URL is also at the top of this slide, cipapplication.cira.ca. When you get there, you need to create a login and password for the application system. Then you can begin your application, and you can save partial responses as you go, so you can log out and come back as needed. This is what it looks like once you log into our online application system, Fluid Review. You will see all of the tasks you need to complete in the bulleted list on the right-hand side. The application form is one task, the budget sheet is one task, and the rest of the required attachments are listed as individual tasks. The required documentation differs depending on your organization type. For example, if you're applying from a university, you're not required to submit your organizational operating budget and board of directors list. This task is only required for nonprofits and registered charities. When you select your organization type within the application form and complete and submit the application form, only those uploads relevant to your type of organization will appear in the list on the right-hand side. Also on the right-hand side towards the bottom, you can see that you can add other people called members if you want multiple people working on your application. Watch the green progress bar on the upper right to track your progress through the application process and submission of required documents. Once you finish all of the relevant tasks, one task remains before your application submission is complete. A representative in your organization with signing authority must complete the authorization form, confirming that they approve the application form and budget. You can add the authorizer to the application as a member, and they will receive an email inviting them to review and approve the application. In some cases, the authorizer and the submission owner may be the same person. The authorizer signs the form using their mouse as a pen. Please note that the application can only be submitted by the submission owner, not the authorizer. The final step in the process is to click on Submit. Prior to pressing Submit, you can make changes to any part of your application, the uploads, the application form, but once you press Submit, you can no longer make any changes and your application is moved on to CIRA's eligibility review stage. The project budget sheet is an Excel form that must first be downloaded through the online system, then filled out offline, saved, and then re-uploaded into the system. Here are a few tips for completing the budget form. Total revenues must match total expenses. We ask that you please present your total project budget. If the total project budget is greater than the amount being requested from CIRA, please show the other sources of funding you are seeking or have already confirmed. Also, please ensure you reflect the value of all in-kind contributions within the revenue and expenses section. CIRA doesn't fund ongoing core costs or full-time staff positions, but you can present the costs of delivering the project. And if that includes people time, that's fine. You can also allocate up to 15% of your grant request towards project administration. That means the overhead costs of delivering the project. For example, rent, accounting, management, the things that make it possible for your project to run at all. For each project expense line, please explain how you arrived at your estimates. Provide detailed cost breakdowns where possible. For example, show hourly rates, equipment costs broken down, estimates for all aspects of travel like flights, accommodation, meals. Keep estimates on file if you receive quotes from potential vendors. And finally, the financial request from CIRA must be in line with your organization's size and capacity. Successful grant recipients are provided with a final report form that they must complete 90 days after the project grant period ends. The form replays the information you gave us in the original application form and asks how the project's results compared to what was projected at the beginning. A sample copy of the final report form is available on our website so you can see in advance what information will be requested of you if your project is selected for funding. So, to familiarize yourself with the types of projects we are looking to fund, please read about recent grant recipients available in the How to Apply section on our website. You can go to cira.ca/grants and get all of this information that we've just presented, and you can look at example projects. We'll emphasize again that we encourage you to submit your application well before the deadline so there are no last-minute delays caused by incorrect or missing information resulting from the eligibility review. As we mentioned, emails will be automatically generated as part of the application process from noreply@fluidreview.com, so make sure to check your daily quarantine or spam reports for emails from the system, or check your junk email folder if you're expecting to hear from us. You will receive a confirmation email once your application has been successfully submitted. If you're unsure whether it's been properly submitted, you can email us. So that's a lot of information to take in one go. And we're happy to take a few minutes now to answer questions that you may have. And we'll remind you that all of this information is available from our website at cira.ca/grants. Any questions?
All right, it's Erica here again. So I see we have a number of questions that have come in. So we'll do our best to get to many of them. So first question, is an institution able to submit more than one application?
Good question. Yes, an institution can submit more than one application. So one organization could submit multiple applications. If it were from a research institution, you would have to have a different lead researcher on each application. So that there's a distinction for research institutions, but yes, an organization can submit more than one.
Okay, and another question here, Maureen talked about the areas we are hoping to focus on this year, one of them being Northern Canada. So how does CIRA define Northern?
We don't have a very specific definition, but we rely on the people in the communities to think about the beneficiaries and where they're located and whether they are in a northern area. For example, we've had questions recently about areas in Ontario. We would say Sudbury and North is Northern Ontario. I think it depends on each province. And what I would encourage is that organizations that are actually outside of major urban centers will probably be considered either northern or rural, or a bit different than where we've traditionally got a lot of applications. So we don't have a specific definition, and we're not getting out our latitude and longitude to check on each application, but I would hope that the people that are applying would know that they're northern.
Okay, so a question here around, can you clarify the timelines with respect to project implementation and reporting, and preference for the $100,000 grant? Does the money need to be expensed within the year or 2-year period?
For grants up to $100,000, we generally look at a 1-year timeline. It can be that a project could be shorter. It's rare, but projects sometimes are shorter. And sometimes they're a little bit longer. Like we won't bat an eye if it's, 1 year and 3 months, that kind of thing. So do your best to keep it within a 1-year time frame, but obviously we're a little flexible on that point. And for the up to $250,000 project, that can also be completed within 1 year if it's achievable, but those ones have up to 2 years to complete.
Okay. And another one here, do we accept projects already on their way or ongoing, but that would use a grant for another phase?
Good question. If it's a project funded by us, we would want to definitely see another phase. If it's I think that's the key point in that question, is that we wouldn't fund something that's, we're going to keep doing what we're already doing. It would have to be a project or an initiative where something new is being proposed that is a new development for that project. So if you were going to work with a different community perhaps, or if you were going to do it in a new way, or take a pilot and expand it, something like that. So it can't be a continuation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another question, can we be the primary applicant on one application and partner on another one?
Yes, you can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and some questions coming in around the documentation. So I'll choose one here. What kind of documentation will be sufficient if our not-for-profit is incorporated in 2020?
You will definitely need to prove to the evaluation committee that you have a track record of delivering projects. That's probably the most important thing. We would need to see some kind of evidence that you have actually, delivered projects somehow in the past. That may have been through volunteer efforts, and that's how you got to the point of now incorporating. So you would need to show some kind of financial track record, and you would need to show operational budget plans. So those kinds of things are requirements. And sometimes brand new organizations will have a harder time because not all of those things are established. But we wouldn't say don't apply. It's just you would need to be able to demonstrate some kind of sort of operational and financial track record, even if it has previously been through more of a volunteer effort or more of a less formal effort, so that the committee gets a sense that you would be able to deliver on the project that you're proposing.
Mhm. Okay. And a few questions here on whether your organization is eligible to apply, including hospitals and municipalities. You want to speak to that?
Sure. Municipalities, we would say no, because what is eligible to apply is a nonprofit organization, so something that's incorporated as a nonprofit or a registered charity. In the case of hospitals, I do believe we've had some research departments at hospitals or hospital foundations potentially applying. I'm not familiar enough with the institutional structure of hospitals and how they work and how they're incorporated. So my baseline answer on that is if you're not incorporated as a nonprofit or incorporated as a registered charity, then you are eligible.
Okay. A question here, with K-12 schools, do you need partnerships already in place or just a proposal?
A project proposal is always stronger when you have partnerships in place. So if you have evidence that something is coming, then please show that. If you've got something more concrete, that will help you even more.
Okay. Can you better define innovation? Does innovation include something that was done in one community, but something that would be considered innovative in a completely different kind of community?
I think that's an interesting distinction that you're demonstrating right there. And yes, that could possibly be innovation. I think one thing that the committee will be looking for is, has it been done before? Is somebody already doing it? Is it something that we've seen before? So the idea that you've suggested that it will, if you're doing it with a different community, that's probably going to actually require you to do it differently and figure out new things and lessons learned from your previous work in a different community. So anything you can show where you're innovating or learning lessons or will have lessons to share, I think would help with the innovation aspect of the evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a question about the funding. When the funding is provided, is it as draws or a lump sum upon completion?
Oh, once we've gone through all of the contractual paperwork, you would receive the funding in one lump sum at the beginning of your project. So you would have to plan on your project beginning in June or later, because that is when funds would be released.
Okay. And seeing a few questions about the equipment or IT training. So one question was, can you elaborate on that area that we talked about that we will not fund for?
Yeah, I mean, we realize obviously that equipment is often an important part of any project. What the reticence around equipment is that we want to make sure that it stays with an institution, that a project isn't just about supplying equipment to a project, that equipment is one element of the overall project. So it's not like equipment is not allowed, it's just that it shouldn't be the only thing in the budget, and it is definitely something that the committee spends a little bit of time evaluating very carefully, because it's the work that goes along with providing the equipment that is as important to the project implementation as the equipment itself.
Okay. So here's a question about budgets. Are sample budgets available online?
We don't have sample budgets available online. That's a good request, and it might be something that we may be able to do in future. We do suggest there is quite a bit of sort of advice and commentary in the project budget sheet itself that suggests how you would put specific elements of your project in. So how you would put in hourly rates for staff, people involved in the project implementation. How you would put in costs broken down for equipment if that is an element of your budget, how you would put in travel, etc. So if there are specific questions that you need advice on, our general advice is try to break it down as much as possible so we can see where the money's going and how it's breaking down. But if you have specific questions as you're doing it, you can feel free to write to CIP@CIRA.ca and we'll do our best to respond.
Okay. And we talked a lot about the eligibility review that we do with staff. And a question here, if the application cannot be changed after we select submit, how can we make changes if the CIRA staff makes suggestions for changes, again, prior to the deadline?
Right, sorry, that might not have been clear. Good question. Once you press submit, we do the review. If there are things that we note that are missing or need correction or clarification, we send it back to you, and after that you are able to resubmit. So it's not like you're cut off once you submit. We do that check, and if we find things, for example, we'll find things where information may not have been included, or it's not clear what dates the statements, the financial statements or the budget are. So we often will send back with questions of clarification so that the information is up to date and complete for the committee. And in any case, we send you back a detailed list of this is what we were looking for. If you have it, you have the opportunity to resubmit by the deadline of February 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay. I see a lot of questions here about specific project examples. So I'll ask this one here. If we have questions on whether a project is a good fit for applying, can we discuss this with CIRA staff in advance so we know whether to apply or not?
Yeah, I think the best way to do that would be to drop us an email at cip@cira.ca. We can't give a whole lot of detailed advice on individual projects, but it's usually fairly quick that we can give you a sense of whether this fits within the 4 funding areas or not, and can try to sort of give you advice on how you can read the guidelines to understand if your project fits or not.
Okay. Should a proposal focus on only one of the funding areas, for example, infrastructure, or is it possible to include more than one area in one proposal?
You're welcome to, if your project touches more than one area, that's fine. For our own tracking of project funding, we like to kind of identify what's the most relevant area to what you're looking for, but it doesn't exclude you. If your project, for example, crosses over between cybersecurity and digital literacy, that's fine, or any other kind of overlap. We ask you when you're filling in the application form to identify the area that best matches what you're applying for, but you wouldn't be disqualified based on choosing one and your project covering more than one.
Okay. And a question around digital literacy. What does CIRA consider digital literacy, and does it consider people with language barriers who want to attain digital knowledge?
I would say that sounds like it is out of scope. I wouldn't mind having a little bit more detail if you were able to send us a note at cip@cira.ca. Generally, what we're looking for in the digital literacy area is projects and initiatives that help build digital skills, but it wouldn't necessarily be about content that is available digitally. So I think the digital literacy one is probably the most challenging to interpret at our side. So if you do have questions about that, I'd be happy to see that we answer them through the CIP@cira.ca account.
Okay. If a question about .ca, if we don't have a .ca website, will your project be denied?
No .ca website, heavens. It's fine. Not everybody has a .ca website. Of course, we like it and we encourage it, and perhaps you could, set up a redirect or something, but we will accept projects from any domain of that you're already operating.
A few questions from past recipients, it looks like here as well. So one question, can we submit for the same project CIRA has already funded in the past in order to extend the life of the project?
I would say that, again, that's kind of like a question we had earlier. To extend the life of the project already funded, very unlikely, because that's like a continuation. If you're taking the project in a new direction, developing a new module, a different approach, something that is distinct and kind of a one-time, okay, this is a new initiative on the original one, that is something we would consider.
A question about what is the documentation required for an applicant from a university?
Applicant from a university, so everybody, no matter who's applying, has to put an application form. So that's a series of a whole bunch of questions, I think 10 or 12 areas of questions, as you'll have seen in the evaluation form, and a project budget. Distinct to universities is that we need a letter of support from the institution acknowledging that the person that's applying actually has an affiliation with the university and what they're doing, and that they support the project because they're kind of like signing off on the project for the institution. And then a CV for the lead researcher on the project. That's the extent of what's required from university academics and colleges.
Question here, do outputs need to be provided in French and English?
There's no requirement for outputs to be provided in any particular language. It's whatever works with the community that will benefit from your project.
Okay, and for people of a 1-year project, how would you define sustainability beyond that 1 year?
What we want to see there is how will the project keep living once there's no funding from CIRA. So sometimes people have the really fortunate experience of the CIRA funding helping them attract additional funding, sometimes lots more, that helps them carry the project on in different ways and with new and different supporters. And sometimes the project, you finish the item and the output, for example, if it's a report or a training module, and you're still able to keep using that ongoing for many years because you've had the initial infusion of cash to be able to create that product. So sustainability can be, how's it going to keep living beyond the actual funding for the specific initiative?
So a few questions on online services and how that's not a funding area this year. And someone has to be crystal clear, you're not funding any apps or platforms this year. And another question, will online services be back in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not entirely accurate to say we're not doing apps and platforms, because if they were related to digital literacy or cybersecurity, for example, there's no reason that they wouldn't be considered, keeping in mind that those two areas have very specific focus also. The areas that has been discontinued in online services has to do with those kinds of digital developments that are serving other needs. Most of what is happening through the CIRA funding is specifically related to improving the internet for Canadians and building a trusted internet for Canadians. So that is much more connected to the actual operation of the internet or understanding how it works. So that, and we've done many projects in the past that are much more focused on, for example, environmental change or health issues, or quite a diversity. And in the program review that the committee did in the last year, it was decided to bring the focus in a little bit tighter to be able to increase the support for the work being done in digital literacy, cybersecurity, and the other areas. I don't expect that online services would come back within the next 2 years, but I can't predict 100%.
A question about partnerships. How do we handle a partnership for a project, a letter of support, etc.? There are different situations I can imagine where a partnership would be required for implementation. One of them that I can think of that I have suggested to various initiatives is, if you aren't a nonprofit or a charity yourself, sometimes you can partner with another nonprofit or charity to apply on your behalf, for example. I don't know if that's the scenario that you're thinking of. And in that case, you would need to be able to demonstrate all of the required documentation from that agency, because they would be the one taking the financial responsibility for the project. So yes, a letter of support would be fine, but they're already going to be responsible for anything like the financial transactions, etc., of the project. If your project is basically bringing in a lot of different stakeholders, there's an area in the application form where you can describe who it's going to benefit and how they became involved in the project. It's either in the project beneficiaries or the project planning section. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that is another place where you can identify, you know, we have partnerships with these different organizations and they will be involved. So if it helps to show the strength of the project that you're presenting, it's a good idea to indicate it in the application form.
And I think there's a possibility to upload additional documents if you do need to show a partnership letter, although often if we have a question after the project has been through the review process and the committee's considered it, we may come back to an organization asking them for more information.
And if not fully funded or funded fully, is it possible that a lower funding could be provided for or the whole application would be rejected?
Good question. I think the committee looks at all of the projects at the project amount that they submit, but there have been cases where a project is considered quite worthwhile, but not able to fund the entire amount. So we would go back to the applicant to say, we're willing to fund your project at this level instead of that level. Are you still interested? Are you still able to deliver? And in that case, if the applicant is keen, then they would submit an updated budget and, if necessary, a rescoped project, because obviously if you're not getting all the money that you were expecting, are you able to do all the deliverables? So that has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. Are there parameters around ownership of funded infrastructure?
I think that would probably be one that's easier to follow up on the specifics if you want to send a specific question to CIP@CIRA.ca. There are parameters, but as we noted earlier in the webinar, we expect that the outputs of a project would be open and available, so for communities to use. Specifically in relation to infrastructure, our expectation is that it not be privately owned, but available to the community to access. And I could probably give you better language around that if you want to send me a specific question. Send us a specific question at CIP@CIRA.ca.
Is there a minimum amount that can be applied for?
There's no minimum.
And a few questions about the communities or people that projects would serve. And we did talk about Indigenous, Northern, rural communities and students. Can projects serve and benefit other communities across Canada?
Certainly, we're interested in knowing who your project is intending to benefit. So on the application form, there's lots of places to fill in exactly who you think is going to benefit. Obviously, we're targeting beneficiaries in those communities, but if you're going beyond that, so on top of, great. And if you are not directly benefiting those communities, that's also fine. We're considering applications that benefit Canadians, but we are specifically targeting those communities. But that doesn't mean we won't consider projects that don't directly target those communities.
Okay.
And I think we've got maybe another minute or two to answer a few more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, just see some here. A question about how we define post-secondary students, students older than 18.
Yep, certainly.
Okay, great. What are application requirements for nonprofits?
I think that'll be our final question. The application requirements for nonprofits are that you fill out the application form budget sheet, same for everybody, and then nonprofits specifically must provide their board of directors list. They have to provide proof of incorporation, audited financial statements, and operational budget for the year. I think that's about it, but honestly, all of those details are available on the website and in the application system. So you can actually go into the CIP application.CIRA.ca and start an application, and you'll see right on the right-hand side the different documents that are required. But all the details are on CIRA.ca/grants.
Great. And so there were a lot of questions that came in, a lot about your specific project or ones that hopefully we covered during the webinar. For questions about will this be available online later? Yes, we'll definitely have a recording of this webinar on our website that you can go back to and refer to. And for any other information about the grants or where the actual application form is, again, that's all under our website, CIRA.ca/grants.
Great, and we hope this webinar has been useful to you. Don't hesitate to contact us if you have additional questions. You'll see the email address there on the screen. As we've mentioned, we can't give specific personalized guidance and feedback about every single project, but we'll do our best to answer generally your questions. If you have any technical issues when you're inputting your application online, you can contact Fluid Review directly, and their link is right on the website there under the help in the online application system. So thanks again for listening, for all your questions and your engagement, and for your interest in the Community Investment Program. All the best. Bye.